Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. Brief introduction before we get to the interview. Please take a moment, if you are not a subscriber or a supporter, to become a patron of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. You can go to patreon.com/unauthorized disclosure, or you can go to the dissenter.org. And if you go to the dissenter.org, you can become a subscriber at the lowest tier, an outside agitator, and you can support the podcast in that way. We have a very special conversation for you with Gideon Levy, who is the author of The Killing of Gaza, Reports on a Catastrophe. This is a collection of dispatches and reporting from his coverage of Israel, Palestine, and related issues. And so there's been a lot that's unfolded over the past week. I do a longer breakdown. If you're a subscriber, I did a longer exclusive introduction for those who are supporters of the podcast. But I just briefly set you up for this conversation by emphasizing that the climate in Israel is extraordinarily repressive, and journalists like Gideon Levy are far and few. People who pay close attention to Gaza and have an interest in the plight of Palestinians are few in the profession, in the journalism profession in Israel. With that, we get to this week's show. And thank you for tuning in. And I hope you appreciate the conversation. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be joined today by Gideon Levy, who is a columnist for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz and the author of a new collection of dispatches that he's been writing, The Killing of Gaza, Reports on a Catastrophe. It's available now from Verso Books. He's speaking to me from Tel Aviv, as I understand. Thank you for joining, Gideon.
Thank you for having me. You are holding a book that I didn't see yet, so I envy you.
Okay. It's very well done, and I must applaud you for seeking the humanity in both Palestinians and Israelis. And as an American abroad who continues to look to different people to try and figure out what is it my government is doing. I've been wrestling with the role that they play, and I don't want to make it too much about the United States because with or without the US, it seems like there would be conflict, but it definitely feels like the United States makes it worse for everyone involved, by not playing a role that it could play to stop the violence. So there's a lot of different aspects of the violence that we've seen unfolding, the horrors, the nightmares that have been inflicted. As I speak to you right now, the most horrible image in people's minds is the image of this 19-year-old Shaban al-Dalu, who was engulfed in flames in a hospital and was connected to an IV, and people have seen his body melting during these flames, with the flames coming up around. This is a image that has been shared around the globe this past week. I'm talking to you on October 17th. I just throw that out there because everything is changing very quickly. Before I get into specific parts of your book, what is on your mind right now as you watch the Israeli military, and it's now spread? It's not just confined to Gaza. I think before you put this book together, it hadn't expanded into Lebanon in the way that the war has expanded.
It's a mixture of emotions, which not all of them are already clear because we are in the eye of the storm. Maybe the worst is still ahead of us. Maybe we didn't see everything yet. By the time that you are mentioning this melting body, this morning there was another massacre in Gaza, and 10 children were killed. I mean, you can hardly follow the events. By this time, those events are totally ignored in Israel, in my country, totally ignored, even not informed in the most basic way. So you feel frustration because your voice is gone with the wind. You feel lonely. You feel that Israel became as united as never before, even though there are all those cliches that Israel is divided. Israel is not divided at all. Israel is united in supporting the wars, the two wars now, the two fronts. Israel is uniting in ignoring the atrocities and the crimes. And vis-a-vis all this, it's very hard to raise a different voice, very hard. I am doing it for 35 years, but it was never so hard. And you feel ashamed, you feel frustrated, you feel painful because Gaza is a place that I used to love. I used to visit it very often. And I really love this piece of land and its people, their courage, their spirit, their really way of standing and not giving up. So altogether, it's a whole mixture of emotions, which I don't know how will they end, because I don't know how those wars going to end. Right now, you don't see the end.
Before I get to specifics in your book, do you not see the end because it's not clear what the end game or the end goal is for the Israeli government? I'll just say, as an American, I'm not sure that even my own government knows what it would like to achieve, or what you know how much of this is worth pushing forward. But it just seems like they're not willing to stop the Israeli government. Obviously, the biggest conversation is on, and you write about this in your book, withholding the arms to the Israeli government, and saying that that would play a big role in stopping the violence. But would it? And and does Israel know what it wants to achieve?
I'm not sure that there is an end game. And if there is an end game, it's an unachievable one. The real end game, the real wet dream of Israel, of Israelis, is to see an empty Gaza Street without Palestinians, an empty southern Lebanon without Hezbollah, without Arabs at all, without Lebanese, and for the future to come also to see an empty West Bank without Palestinians. That's the real dream, but most of the Israelis, the saint Israelis, know it's unachievable. Now with Gaza, you are talking about an end game. Let's say that the goals are achieved and Israel is totally deleting Hamas. And then what? And then who comes there? Who is going to govern Gaza? Does Israel has any clue except of staying there forever and enlarging the Israeli brutal occupation also to Gaza, returning it to Gaza? So there is no end. And therefore, I can't see the end, because it's not only that the goals are unachievable, even if they will be achieved, you don't see the end.
And I know there's talk of annexing like northern Gaza. At least that's the reporting that I've seen here in the United States. And my question to you is, from within Israel, is who's going to want to live on this land after it's been so destroyed by the Israeli military? One thing I've had trouble with over the last year is, it's almost as if they would want it to just be inhospitable so that nobody can live on the land. So if it's going to be Palestinian land, well, then we'll just make sure that nobody could exist on this land?
There is nothing like nobody can exist on this land. Gaza was destroyed already, even though never in those scale, in this scale, but it can always be rehabilitated. It's only question of money. But Israel will not leave it empty, because if the northern part of Gaza will be evacuated, as Israel wishes, the settlers will be there. They are planning it already. And then you will see Jewish settlements there. And then for sure nobody will be able to return there. So the danger is much bigger. Those lunatic right-wingers in Israel, never gave up the dream to settle Gaza. They see Gaza as part of Israel, of the full Eretz Israel. And with those lunatics, you can expect anything.
Okay. My question, I suppose, is just recognizing that all of these weapons being used are heavily polluting the water supply, heavily polluting the land there, and I think about the cancers that might be caused and what settlers would suffer moving into the land, but maybe they just do not care about that kind of a thing.
No, they don't care, and Gaza is already polluted. And the UN, by the way, declared Gaza long time ago in a special report as an unlivable place in 2020. We are now 2024 and 2.3 million people are living there. So the settlers are the last one to care about environment, to care about even their own health. I mean, they have one goal, and this is to liberate the land, the holy land that they are sure that belongs to them and only to them. And with those arguments, you cannot argue because they are not rational.
All right. So I do a lot of work following journalism and freedom of the press, and so I'd like to ask you about parts of your book where you address the Israeli media, and also I've seen you speak about the law that was used to shut down Al Jazeera in Israel. And so first, let me just say, as I follow all of the reports from people who have rightfully these media freedom organizations or journalist groups that have pointed out how this is the deadliest conflict since they started tracking journalist deaths, particularly as Gaza journalists have been killed. I think the most official count has it somewhere between 120 to 130 journalists killed since October 7th, 2023. I did not know, and this is not talked about, and perhaps not talked about because it's been the policy for so long, but coming to this, I didn't realize that Israeli journalists were banned from accessing the Gaza Strip. There's a lot of talk about foreign journalists or international journalists not being allowed into Gaza Strip, but I did not know that you could not go to Gaza. Can you speak about being barred from entering Gaza and just what this means for your work?
The last time that I visited Gaza was back in 2006. Ever since then, 18 years, no Israeli journalist was allowed into the Gaza except by accompanying the Israeli troops in all those horrible wars, which I didn't do, and I hope I will never be tempted to do, because that's for sure not journalism. The moment I couldn't step into Gaza was the moment that I knew that my professional mission is from now on very partial, because Gaza was one of the main, if not the main, fields where I could practice my mission, namely to describe the Israeli occupation, to describe the Israeli crimes, to describe us Israelis, to describe the moral profile of the only democracy in the Middle East. And once I couldn't enter Gaza, big part of it was fatally damaged. Not to speak about my personal emotions, not being able to go to this place which I really was attached to emotionally, with friends, with victims, with people who sacrificed everything, and my heart went out to them. In any case, ever since 2008, no Israeli journalists were allowed to enter. And Kevin, I have news for you. Almost all my colleagues had no interest to do so. It's not like the Israeli journalists went to a big protest against it. Haaretz was the only outlet that at least appealed to the Supreme Court and obviously failed to change it, because most of the Israeli journalists think that journalism is when you go with the army and you cover the army in Gaza, and that's enough for journalists. They have no interest to see Gaza, to talk to the people of Gaza, to describe the suffering of Gaza, no interest whatsoever, because they know that no Israeli has any interest in it. And therefore, I feel I'm handicapped in a way. I go regularly, at least once a week, to the West Bank, and there are enough crimes to cover there. But Gaza is avoided from me, and I'm avoided from Gaza. And if you ask me, Kevin, one place on earth that I would like to visit one more time, I will definitely tell you it is the Gaza Street.
And in this book, I believe it's in your introduction. I'm just going to read your words and then have you further comment. On October 7th, 2023, the media ceased to be journalists and instead became an agent of nationalistic and militant emotions, stirring up and inciting a ministry of propaganda, a public relations agency for the army responsible for elevating the morale of a public at war. And so, even as you say that the media organizations, their journalists were not interested in traveling into Gaza, it got much worse after October 7th. How much worse has it become in Israel?
I would like to elaborate on this, Kevin, with your permission. In all the wars that Israel launched, mainly in Gaza, but also in Lebanon, there was always a wall-to-wall support of the Israeli public opinion and of the media in the beginning. And short after it, usually when there were all the expected cracks, when things went wrong, for many ways, you start to hear voices of criticism, of questioning, of doubting the need of this war. This didn't happen this time. The 7th of October 2023 changed Israel, and only for the bad. After the 7th of October, almost all Israelis believe that not only they have the right to do whatever they want in Gaza because of the atrocities of the 7th of October. There are no limits, no borders, no international law, no morality, nothing. But more than this, even the best Israelis lost any interest or empathy to the suffering of Gaza. It's unbelievable how people lost their humanity only because of those horrible atrocities. I've been to the south, I saw what happened there. It was horrible. Don't put any doubts about it, but it doesn't justify everything. And ever since then, the Israeli press, media, recruited itself voluntarily to serve only one narrative. And that's the narrative, the false narrative of the Israel as the victim, of Israel as the weak one, obviously of Israel as the just one, Israel who has the right for self-defense, as if the Palestinians don't have any right for self-defense. And it's very hard to break this narrative because almost all Israelis want to see only this and know only this. It's not like the government is imposing it on the Israelis or on the media. The media does it voluntarily, not because of ideology, but because they know that that's the only way now to please the viewers and the listeners and the readers. They don't want to get anything else. They don't want moral doubts now. They want just more of the same, namely, we have the right to punish Gaza in any possible way. It's not only our right, it's our duty. That's the only solution. There is no other solution. and we are behind it.
I'm not sure that it's as bad, but the situation with the United States media organizations collectively, it does seem to have many of these problems, particularly with the broadcast networks over the last couple of weeks have gained notoriety for attacks on a fairly acclaimed award-winning journalist, Ta-Nehisi Coates, a Black journalist who's been trying to push his book, The Message, about his travels to the region. I just mentioned that in asking you. You had your own personal experience. You write about an interview. This was in one of your March reports. You read about an interview where you said that Israel's treatment of Palestinian captives was no better than Hamas's treatment. You say you were no longer allowed to continue being attached or working for appearing on this public affairs or current affairs program. Can you speak about that experience?
Yeah, I used to be a panelist in one of the main Israeli channels, TV channels, for quite a few years now, at least once, twice a week. It is the most liberal program in Israeli media, not too liberal, but that's by far the most liberal program in the well-established media. And I was very happy there. And the host, the editor, maybe friends of mine, but for sure friends of mine. And everything went very smoothly until this war was launched. Soon after it, they stopped my participation there. They told me it's only for 2-3 weeks because the war will not be longer than 2-3 weeks. And now it's 1 year, over 1 year, that I wasn't interviewed in any of Israeli outlets, TV or radio, which was the case before the war. I was quite often there. It's not really about me personally. I have my platforms. I cannot complain. I'm interviewed internationally more than ever before. By the way, you spoke about American media. I was never so many times in CNN like in this war, but not only CNN, not the American networks, but international networks. There is not a day that I'm not interviewed. So I can't complain. I have also the platform of Haaretz, which is still very respected platform and very liberal and free. I have no problems there whatsoever, even though most of my colleagues don't agree with me, unlikely the past, but I'm still totally free to express myself, and I'm very grateful for it because I can't take it for granted. But the fact that my voice was totally silenced by Israeli private TV, not governmental one, gives you the sense of the self-censorship of Israeli media and gives you the sense that only one voice is allowed now in Israel. And those are not bad news for me. Those are very bad news for the media.
And then I must ask you about this national security law. You write in your book, at least a couple times, I think it popped up. You mentioned that Al Jazeera English, the English network, has a rather balanced way of covering what has unfolded. Attending to Palestinians and also what goes on in Israel. And yet the world has seen now its West Bank Bureau has been shut down. We've seen it banned in Israel. Actually, as I talked to you, apparently there have been warnings but I think this might be the Arabic station, but for Al Jazeera TV in Beirut, received warnings that it could be attacked. I don't know if that's serious or not, but clearly there is an all-out campaign against Al Jazeera by the Israeli government. I'm aware that this has existed for several years, but as it has appeared during this war, what are your comments on these attacks and what they say about freedom of the press?
Al Jazeera is a very comfortable target for Israel. They would love to close CNN and bomb CNN if they could. close Haaretz and bomb Haaretz if they could, but they know they can't do it. Al Jazeera is much easier to close down. We have to remember that Al Jazeera is the only international outlet, Al Jazeera English, and I'm speaking only about English, and it is very different than the Arabic Al Jazeera. I'm not a consumer of Al Jazeera Arabic because I don't speak Arabic, so everything I say is about Al Jazeera English, which is separated from the Arabic one. And Al Jazeera English is the only international outlet with boots on the ground in Gaza, with reporters in Gaza. No other international outlet has reporters in Gaza. Can you imagine yourself? Imagine yourself, no reporters in Ukraine, nothing. So Al Jazeera is the only one to have it, and this bothers the Israelis a lot, because what Al Jazeera broadcasts from Gaza shows what Israel is doing there, or shows more of what Israel is doing there. And why not to close down if it's possible? I can tell you Al Jazeera will continue to be the same network also after closing its bureaus in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Israel will not be the same place.
As I wind this down, I also have to ask you about a very poignant dispatch or an article that you wrote about joy from Palestinians and how that is not allowed on Israeli media. This was at the time that there had been a release of prisoners from Israeli detention centers. It's pretty obvious to me why they don't want to show it, but I mean, what does this really bring out about the sickness and what Israel collectively is grappling with, when they can't show Palestinians being happy that, and it was agreed to, and as I understand it, wasn't this part of, Hamas was going to release some of the captives as well?
It's much worse than this, Kevin, and it got worse ever since I wrote it. Because it's not only not to show human happiness of Israeli Palestinians who are happy that their brothers are released. It got much worse than this. They are not allowed to pay any kind of empathy with the suffer of their brothers and sisters. They are not allowed to show any solidarity with them. For example, the Israeli, just to inform your viewers, I'm sure they know all this, but 20% of Israeli citizens are Palestinians, not those who are under occupation who have no citizenship, 5 million people without any citizenship, but 20% of the Israeli population, around 2 million people, full Israeli citizens and are Palestinian by their origin. They all have families in the West Bank and Gaza. All of them. They all know people there. They have friends there. They are part of the same people. When Russian Jewry couldn't leave Russia, the Jews all over the world and the state of Israel went crazy with campaigns to release them, because it was natural. You care about the people of your own people, the members of your own nation. The Israeli Palestinians are not allowed to do so. No empathy, no solidarity, not to speak about actions. They collected in recent weeks tons of humanitarian aid for Gaza. Israel doesn't let them transfer it into the Gaza. They search after each expression of solidarity, humanity in the social media, and people are arrested. People are fired from their jobs. McCarthyism in its worst version. People are telling the authorities, informing the authorities that their colleague at work paid some condolences to the Palestinians who lost their children. That's enough to fire him or even to arrest him or her. That's really a very, very radical environment, far of being democratic, obviously. And my theory is that those are irreversible changes within the Israeli regime. It's not like after the war it will be better. No, no. The Israeli Palestinians are due to live in a new reality from now on. And after them, it will be the leftists, or what will be left from the leftists, and the peaceniks, and those who have some questions about Zionism, and those who could dare to criticize the army. They will be the next ones to be silenced. All those are not very promising things for Israel, not for us, the dissidents, for Israel itself.
Just a quick follow-up. What you're speaking about are, as I understand it, speech crimes. That's how they would probably categorize these offenses. And is it fair to say this is much, much worse than it has been in recent Israeli history? What I'm hearing from you is that this escalation is one in which you can't go back, that you almost have to make it a part of law in Israel or common and normal. Otherwise, you're staring into the abyss. You're looking at how much depravity you have as a country. So they have to normalize it.
Absolutely. And they see it as an opportunity. You see, for all those, first of all, we have to face it that we have the most fascist and right-wing government ever in the history of Israel. That's a matter of fact, obviously. Now, saying this government sees what's happening in the last year as a huge opportunity to change not only the security situation of Israel and its foreign policy, but also its domestic structure. That's for them the huge opportunity to create a new system, a new regime in Israel, namely that Israel is only for the Jews, with all the consequences of it. And they are doing so without having a real opposition, because there is no opposition in Israel. For sure not an effective one. And in this framework where nobody cares because everyone thinks about the hostages and about the soldiers and about the killed ones and about the injured one, about the war, they are changing Israel from within. And this might be irreversible, as I said before. Yeah.
You do write out in your book, in in several of these reports that are in there, you do address what the globe, what the so-called international community could do to force Israel to make a choice. But since I'm an American, let me just make it specific to the US. And I'm curious, how is the United States spoken about? How is its support for Israel spoken about in the media? What I tend to see within the borders here, when it makes it to the United States, I tend to see officials that are upset that the U.S. government might be speaking about, like as in the last week. In the last week, we've seen, I don't know if it's going to be backed up, but we've seen this in 30 days. If Israel has not addressed the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, there may be some weapons shipments that are not handed over to the Israeli military. We've seen that, but I don't know if that's going to be backed up, if the US government is going to follow through. That said, my question is this talked about openly, the amount of US support? Is it hidden that the Israeli military is getting so much assistance from the US? Is there some kind of acknowledgement that if this was lost, Israel would be vulnerable? Or am I just wrong to think that the US has that much influence?
Look, the United States played a very strange role in this war. On one hand, the administration said all the right things: stop the war, go for a deal, supply humanitarian aid, stop the mass killing, stop the crimes. And in the same time, the United States supplied Israel with all the arms and the ammunition that it needed in an unconditioned way. And that's the key word, unconditioned way, nothing. So first of all, you understand that the United States is a partner of this war. and is a partner, a full partner of the crimes of war, because the United States knows very well what Israel is doing with those weapons and those ammunitions. And when you continue to supply it, you are a full partner. They know very well that not all the weapons are going only for self-defense. They are going also for mass killing in Gaza and now in Lebanon. And they kept sending the arms and the ammunition. So that's the first thing. Now you ask if the United States has a leverage on Israel. There's no one else except the United States, and there is no more effective leverage than the Americans are holding. You saw with the example you just mentioned now. They said 30 days and we stop the supply if you don't let humanitarian aid into Gaza. And the next morning, not after 30 days, the next morning there were 50 trucks inside Gaza with humanitarian aid. Because unlikely the public, who is totally brainwashed, the decision makers know the truth. The heads of the army know the truth. The heads of the government knows the truth, that without the support of the United States, first of all, this war will be over within hours, not days, hours. And secondly, Israel is lost without the United States. It was never so depending on the United States. The problem was that the United States is not ready yet to use this leverage, and I have my doubts if it will ever be ready to do so. You hear all kinds of voices from the United States. You hear the progressive, you hear the young generation in the campuses. This is very encouraging. And meanwhile, you see that the old school of American decision makers are still believing that this is friendship, that supplying Israel with arms and ammunition is showing friendship toward Israel. My claim is that this is corrupting Israel. This enables Israel to commit so many crimes, and that's not friendship. I hope it will change, and I can just tell you one thing. The key is in Americans' hands. The key for change is in the United States' hands. And it only depends on the American administration. It can change Israel. It can change the whole Middle East. It just have to want to do so. And until now, it's very clear the United States of America didn't want to do so.
And just a quick follow-up, and then I'll let you go because I know you have another interview to get to. But just to clarify my question a little bit more, is it a dynamic in Israel that the media would focus on the United States' anytime the U.S. seems to pull back from its support ever so slightly, even though it might not even be that consequential to the future of the war, it seems to me that the Israeli media collectively, that these journalists, these media editors, producers will get together and raise alarm and panic to instill fear in the Israeli population that the U.S. might abandon them. And that's going to be part of applying pressure to the U.S. government to not change course. Is that the feeling that you get in Israel, or am I misunderstanding?
I think the Israeli mindset is that the whole world is anti-Semite. They all are against us, no matter what we are doing. The Americans are perceived as a bit better, but they are also suspected as anti-Semites. All of the UN is obviously anti-Semite. The international courts, both international courts are anti-Semites. Everyone is anti-Semite, and even the United States is always suspected as anti-Semite. That's the tool of Israel to blame the whole world instead of looking upon itself and upon its own actions and policy. And the United States is part of it. Most of the Israelis, I think, are sure that the aid can be taken for granted because decades of support, automatic and blind support, taught them that United States is in our little pocket, that we can do whatever we want, you will continue with your stupidity, sorry for this harsh word, and continue to supply arms, even though Israel is behaving exactly not only against the declared advisors of the United States, but also against the American interests. I don't see in which way Israel is serving American interests by killing 17,000 children in Gaza, for God's sake. What does this serve the American interest? But that's the way they perceive it. Now, yes, it is true that those who know understand how fragile it is, it might become, and how serious it is, and therefore their response will be immediate. Just try it, for God's sake. Try once and for all to put conditions to the aid, and I think even the American administration will be surprised how effective it will be. The problem is that they never tried.
All right. Well, thank you, Gideon. I appreciate you talking with me. I'll let you go so that you can do your interview. But this is an important book, and anybody out there who has just watched this interview, I encourage you to go. The Killing of Gaza, Reports on a Catastrophe by Gideon Levy, longtime journalist and one of the few dissenters, dissenting journalists as a voice in Israel. So thank you for joining.
Thank you, Kevin, for this very interesting and challenging conversation. All the best.